have Brian James joining us from the other side of Canada, and I'm on the East Coast of the United States. And it's so funny, Brian, I thought for some reason you lived about 3 hours from me up in the Toronto area. I don't know why I thought that, but it's so good to have you here.
Thanks. Yeah, well, my wife and I, we met in Toronto years ago, and we lived in Montreal for a couple of years. Came back to the island when all the pandemic stuff started happening. So we were at one
That's it.
point just a few hours up the road and across the border, and mhm.
Ah, that's why I thought you lived on this side. Okay.
I've been
Makes
around.
sense. Well, I've been following your work for a while, and there was something that really caught my eye recently, which actually caught a lot of people's eyes, and we'll get into it. But let me tell people a little bit about the work that you're up to. So Brian is an archetypal coach, musician, artist, and cultural activist based in the BC area of Canada. And over the past decade, he's dedicated himself to helping other creatives and change makers find their soul's purpose and bring their unique vision to life. He is trained in multiple therapeutic modalities and holds certificates in Thomas More's soul psychology, compassionate inquiry, and dream tending. All of his work is informed by his working class upbringing and values, as well as decades of spiritual seeking and practice and immersion in the study of depth and archetypal psychology, history, philosophy, and shamanism. So, Brian, let's get into this a little bit.
So,
I would love to hear your story. I know I've heard a little piece of it before that you had the career in the city. I think you were a art director of sorts, but it sounds like you had that kind of corporate career. And here you are now doing this archetypal soul coaching. I would love to know, how did you get here? And did you know when you were younger that your soul was going to bring you to this place at some point?
uh, did I know when I was younger that my soul was going to bring me here? No, I had no idea. So it took me a while to find my way here. A lot of twists and turns in the path. So yeah, in my early 20s, I started to work as a graphic designer, and then followed that career trajectory, moved to the big city, started working in larger and larger design agencies, finally ending up at a big international advertising firm as an art director and graphic designer. And I mean, that was the beginning of the second half of my life, really, was starting to really struggle with that. And the way that I talk about it, to sum it up, is that my suffering got bad enough so that I started listening. And so I had a midlife wake-up call. I realized that the ladder I was climbing was against the wrong wall the whole time. And the higher I got up into the corporate world, the more my soul was suffering. So that manifested in a number of ways, but I was having panic attacks at the end of yoga class when we were all supposed to be lying down and relaxing in shavasana. I'd be lying there with my heart racing, thinking I was going to die and have to leave the class and go for a walk around the block and calm myself down, and waking up with like terrible night terrors and night sweats, and then trying to kind of alleviate those symptoms through a lot of drinking and distraction, all the usual things. And that was really part of the culture too. In order to fit in and work your way up the corporate ladder, especially in advertising, you really had to join in on all the after work fun of going to the bar and getting shit faced, and then getting up and doing it all over again. So that took its toll and was not sustainable. But it turned out to be a blessing in a way, because put me back on track. And so when I got back on track, I realized that there was a lot of things that my soul had been asking for a long time that I hadn't been paying attention to. And so when you ask, did my soul know I was going to end up here? I knew early on the kind of life that I was meant for, but there was nothing, there was nobody there to model an alternative lifestyle for me. One that like a soulful, artistic, entrepreneurial life. Uh, that wasn't really an option for me early on. I didn't have any model for that. So I ended up following more conventional paths and trying to fit in and, achieving all of the markers of conventional success and all of that. And I was really good at it. I could play the game really well. I think because I was pretty sensitive and intuitive, I could make as much money as I wanted to, as much as I was willing to give up of my life. Uh, but I think I was meant for something else. And so it does feel like kind of a return in a way to something that was in me really early on, maybe from the get-go. But as early as I can remember, having a very vivid dream life, being interested in fantasy life, reading science fiction and fantasy novels. Like my favorite books when I was a kid were always about going to the other world, like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or there was a great book by Stephen King called The Talisman, which was like this heroic journey this young man went on. But they're always about crossing over into some other reality. So there was the seed of like the kind of the shamanic life, always there. And so when I kind of came back to it, it felt like a homecoming, you know. And then after that, all of the creativity just started flowing, and life just got better and more enjoyable. But it's not easy to make it in this world living that kind of life. So, there's been financial difficulties since I've made the big change, but I feel quite rich in every other way.
Every other way. What I would call the real, more important ways. But we'll get into this because this is something a lot of my clients come to me for and come to me with, and I've struggled with myself is, how do we live this life that feels aligned with what's coming through us, with what's really, what I believe to be the soul, this place in our heart, and we live in this world there's a reality of paying bills, of the way things work, of, as we were just talking about before the interview, my brother lives in a place where gas costs $9 a gallon, and it's just part of their everyday reality. But I want to ask a question about your path with either psychedelics or plant medicines or both. How did those come into play? And do you think they, played a part in what you were going through, even with the anxiety and panic attacks, which by the way, your story is extremely similar to my own, working in corporate and numbing myself and then realizing that living in this life of just like pure fear and anxiety is not sustainable. But yeah, how did medicines or psychedelics play a part in your evolution?
Well, I first experimented with psychedelics really young. I was probably 15 the first time I took mushrooms and acid. And had some interesting and terrifying experiences over the years. But when, I had this midlife wake-up call, things got bad enough that I started to really pay attention. And I read, over the years, I read tons of like self-help books and, been going to yoga classes and all that, all the things you're supposed to do, like exercising quite a lot to try to counterbalance all of the stress and anxiety I was experiencing. So I was trying to live a balanced life, but it was like two extremes, right? So anyway, when things got bad enough, I found myself in my office one day up on the 32nd floor overlooking downtown Toronto, just going, you know what, I've had it. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so I did something that nobody in my working class family had ever done. I looked for a therapist or counselor. And it was such an interesting moment because I remember typing into Google. I didn't really know much about therapy, actually. So I didn't know about really different modalities or anything like that. I didn't know how to find a therapist, but I typed in shamanic Therapy Toronto. And I got one relevant return. Of course, there was a lot of therapists and everything, but one person really stuck out because they had those 3 words in their bio or their description. And I just thought, well, that's the guy for me, I guess. And so I started to go see him down in the basement of a church in a little room that he rented. And I remember every time I'd show up, he would be burning this wood that had a really wonderful smell to it. And I asked him about it, and he told me it was this wood called Palo Santo, which means holy wood and comes from South America. And we would talk about my dreams. He would ask me about the dreams I'd had, and I started to keep a dream journal. A significant thing is that we never talked about my childhood. He never asked me about my childhood or anything like that. My family and my background came up, but through the dreams, when it was relevant to a particular dream I'd had. And so this went really well. I felt like I was reconnecting to my dream life in a new way, actually learning how to listen and to work with dreams. And my dreams started to guide me with questions I was having about, should I stay in this successful career or should I be doing something else? Or even questions like, how do I deal with that asshole boss who's always getting on my nerves and trying to get me to work every week? Like practical things. There would be insights in my dreams. And at a certain point, this was going really well. And he asked if I had ever done psychedelics before. And I told him about my early history and experimentation. He said, okay, but have you ever done it like with a particular intention around it? And I thought, well, other than wanting to explore consciousness or the other world, all that, not really, like not with the intention of like healing or something like that. So he suggested that I find myself some magic mushrooms and that I have a little ceremony for myself, and we could talk about it later, after I did it. So I asked my wife, Debbie, if she would, make a date with her girlfriends to be out for the night so I could have the place to myself. Well, it was me and our 2 dogs at the time. And I set everything up. I had a playlist of all my favorite music, the music that really moved my soul. And I had a journal and, candles, and I was like all set up. And I went on this journey, and it was wonderful. I mean, I remember having a lot of insights and making a lot of notes in my journal as things would come to me. A big part of the experience was the insights that were coming through the music. So listening to different music and paying attention to the emotions that were invoked, to some of the messages that were coming through. Like the Beatles are really great for that. Their songs sound really kind of simple and nursery rhyme-like, but if you're high on psychedelics and you listen to the Beatles, as a lot of people know, I know I'm not saying anything new here, but there's some incredibly profound things in the simplicity, like turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream. That's great advice for going on a psychedelic journey. So, and then part of it, one part of the journey is I felt a lot of energy coming through. And so I got up and I had a little melodica, which is a little, a keyboard that you blow into. It's the kind of thing you hear in Jamaican music quite a bit. And so I started playing the melodica, and our 2 Boston Terriers sat up and they started howling along with the melodica, which was, they weren't howling dogs. And so this was like a magical experience. They were singing along with me. And it really, the experience was about reconnecting to creativity and joy for the most part. Like no traumatic memories came up or anything like that. It was about reconnecting to creativity and joy. So I went back and I gave them the report. I told them all about it. Gave him some of the insights from my journal and everything. He said, wow, that sounds like it was really good for you. Have you ever heard of ayahuasca?
I like this guy.
And I had heard of it, but, it was like when I was a teenager and reading all the beat writers like Burroughs and Ginsberg and Kerouac. I remember coming across a book that it was a bunch of letters compiled from William S. Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg about their travels in South America. And Burroughs went down looking for this magical brew called yahe. And he talks about finding someone who was serving it, like a shaman, and about his horrible, horrific, terrifying experience. That was really the only thing I knew about ayahuasca, because it hadn't like hit the mainstream yet at this time. So there's very little information about it online or anything. So anyway, he told me about this church that he was a member of. It was a Brazilian ayahuasca church. And he sent me a video. The only information they had online was a Brazilian, like, TV. It was like one of those first edition kind of shows, like kind of an expose type show. And it was on this cult, the Santo Daime cult. And so it was kind of histrionic. It was, like, woo, they're doing these crazy things. They're drinking this tea and having visions and all this stuff, right? And it was, there was no subtitles or anything. It was all in Portuguese. So it gave me a sense, at least, of like what the ceremonies look like. And it looked kind of strange. I mean, a bunch of people dressed in white uniforms, dancing around stiffly around an altar with a strange cross in the middle and drinking this brown tea like it was a communion offering, So anyway, I just thought it looked strange and very interesting. So I said, yes, bring me along. So he brought me to my first ayahuasca ceremony. And that was the beginning of a longer journey. Discovering plant medicine, particularly ayahuasca, was a big one for me. Probably the main one, but I spent time in the church and then ended up going down to South America because I wanted to experience other ways of working with ayahuasca and other plant medicines as adjuncts to the ayahuasca. And I did that for a number of years, exploring that. And my last ceremony was at the end of 2019, I think. And it was an intense, like 7-year period of working with ayahuasca in different contexts. So that brings us up to today, maybe. I mean, there's a lot of stories in there if you want to hear some of those, but.
Well, I would love to hear about, first of all, thanks for sharing. I love that story. So interesting how we come onto this path. But I would love to hear about the work that you do now. You call yourself an archetypal coach. I know you do men's work, your whole work and your podcast and the content you've been putting out there for years is centered around the soul. Mm-hmm. And this is something I've been bringing into my work as well over the years as I have realized more and more that, what seems to be missing, and I even hesitate to use that word missing, but, it's like the human experience. And so many clients that I've been working with over the years come to me feeling this lack of fulfillment and something feels missing. And, I'm stuck and I'm depressed and, whatever it is. And there's this missing substance, which, we all have theories as to what that could be. For my clients, it tends to be people like me and you who had that very similar path of doing work that was really kind of eating away at our soul and really just, like beyond unfulfillment. But literally for me, it was making me like physically ill, like near-death experiences and, just this knowing that I was kind of on a suicidal path. But, how did you grow your whole business around soul and what is it all about and why soul versus just doing like men's coaching, let's say?
Well, it's not that I kind of organized my business around soul. It's that soul organized my business. So what I've come to learn is that I'm a child of Hermes. And as a child of Hermes, I'm a servant to soul. It's just the way it is, and something that I've had to just come to terms with. What does that mean? So for me, so everything you described, the kind of the modern malaise of anxiety, depression, lack of fulfillment, lack of meaning, all of that. If you went to an indigenous medicine person, they would diagnose you with soul loss, of having suffered some shock or loss of soul. And so the antidote to that is more soul. And I know that that's what I was missing in my life, was a connection to soul and how the soul can guide me. Soul has a plan for our life. I really believe that. And it's our job to get into alignment with that through tending to the soul and listening to the soul. So that for me is why soul is central, because it's the part in each of us that knows what that plan is all about and knows how to put us on a path toward finding more meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. And I like to add enjoyment of life. Like, there's a lot of talk about purpose and meaning and all of that, and these big, heavy topics, but let's not lose the enjoyment. Like, without the enjoyment, I'm not sure you're quite on your right path, because there is a kind of fulfillment and enjoyment that comes when you're on your path, even if it's a little more difficult to walk that path in this modern world, because a lot of times you're swimming upstream of the mainstream, or you're like on an alternate tributary of the mainstream, like you're totally outside the mainstream, trying to make your way in the world. So that's why Soul Central is, because then it's not about me giving someone life advice, like doing kind of life coaching, but it's about helping them connect to their soul and start listening, paying attention, and then following some of those inner prompts as an experiment. Like, what happens if I go with this feeling or this intuition? Let's see what the effect is on my life and my relationships. And I find that things tend to start to work out in a better way if we're doing that. So that's why Soul is central, because if we're working together, it's about helping you connect to your soul and the promptings of your soul through the dream work, through visions, through imagination, through fantasy, all of the ways the soul is trying to speak to us. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's interesting because that's kind of what happened to me when I first really just was like, hey, I need to listen to my soul. This has been coming through me since I was 8 years old. And finally in my mid 30s, I'm like, well, let me see what would happen. And I remember it was very challenging at first, but I remember actually saying to myself, I have never been this happy while being totally broke, like kind of scared, on that edge of like, wow, I'm doing something very new that I've never done before. This is really scary. I've always had this like stable, secure life, or somewhat secure, with jobs. And I went into entrepreneurship. And this is what I've seen over the years. It's like, okay, well, I need to follow what's inside of me. And hey, I am actually enjoying it a lot more. And then, of course, there's the humanly challenges, right? Like paying the bills and making it work and figuring it all out. But I always say that's actually the easier part. It's the trouble that a lot of people seem to have to even listen to what's coming through them. And I'm wondering what your theory is as to, because I have a theory and, I've talked about it a lot on this podcast, but why, or even if you do feel that there's a lot of this kind of soul connection missing in our society.
The answer to that.
Struggle?
You know what I'm going to say.
Of course. But like, there's so much struggle with it. And of course, now with psychedelics being just so big in the mainstream and everybody wanting to turn to that to, solve all their problems, it's like, well, what's really at the root of these problems? The psychedelic is not just going to cure your anxiety overnight or heal your depression without getting into the root of what's causing the anxiety or depression in the first place. But I'm curious, what have you observed and like, what do you think the core issue is at least here in the Western society with, like our general, so many people feeling like disconnected, unfulfilled, stuck in the rat race. Like, what's really going on here?
Well, there's a lot going on. There's so many factors as to why, what leads to people having a tough time in life and experiencing a lot of suffering. There's a lot of societal factors, but one way to look at it is that soul has been really pushed out, like, of the society, of the culture. Like, I think our culture is suffering from soul loss. It's become very kind of rational head-centered, materialistic, individualistic. All of these things are counter to the soul. The soul is non-rational, intuitive, feeling-based rather than intellect-based. And it's communal. The soul is naturally communal. The soul is what connects. The soul between people. The soul connects us to the divine, to the earth, to the soul in everything else. It's through our soul that we experience that connection. And so if the culture is suffering from, what's really been pointed to as a kind of root cause of all the other suffering is a lack of connection, right? Like fundamentally, that's what people are suffering from. Well, that's part of it for sure. And so again, that points toward, well, what's needed here is more soul. And the fact that psychedelics are getting popular again. I mean, I was just talking to someone yesterday about this. It's been called the psychedelic renaissance. I'm Canadian, so I learned a little French going to school, and renaissance means rebirth. And so my question is always, if this is actually a rebirth, what kind of culture is this new thing being born into? Because as we know from biology, the health of the culture will dictate the health of the organism growing within that culture, So if the psychedelic renaissance is happening in a sick culture, then the thing that's being born out of that will also be sick in a way, or misguided, or distorted, perverted, by the kind of values of the culture. And I think it's what's happened with the psychedelic renaissance. I mean, one thing I've been harping about for years is that the soul has been left out of psychedelics. When that term was coined in the 1950s by Humphrey Osmond, he was a medical psychologist, and he was using LSD and I think mescaline to help alcoholics and schizophrenics, or attempt to help them. And he always went back to kind of like the chemical imbalance theory of disease. It was all like happening in the brain. If we could alter the brain chemistry, maybe we could help these people out. And so when he coined that term, or at least popularized it, he defined it as mind manifesting. Well, if you go back and you look at the Greek, psyche means soul, which is a whole lot more than mind. It can be inclusive of mind, but there's a whole lot more that is more than what we think of as mind here in the West, the intellect. So psychedelic, its root meaning is manifesting or revealing the soul. But if that's not our orientation when working with psychedelics, if we're just trying to alter brain chemistry or to go back and recover repressed memory, all those things kind of stored up in the mind, then I think the depth of our journey with psychedelics is going to be limited by the framework, or how we're kind of primed to go into the experience. So I've been advocating for bringing soul back into not just psychedelics, but also psychotherapy, more attention to soul. Because like, as we were saying, like that to me is like fundamentally at the core of what's wrong in our culture. And then of course, like the petri dish analogy, the people in the culture are also going to be sick if the culture's sick. So that's where the cultural activism part of my work comes into play. So it's not just tending to the soul of other people, but it's tending to the soul of my culture. And my response to that is to try to bring more soul into the culture. So more communal gatherings that are centered around, doing imaginal work together, doing dream work together, having ritual together, even, something as simple as teaching music to my nephew, and doing like a youth program based around music. That to me is like tending to the soul of the community that I live in. Because music to me is a pathway to soul, or it's something that enlivens the soul, or feeds the soul. So yeah, there's my diagnosis, loss of soul and culture, and my response, more soul. And that's, that's my job, is like to be a servant to soul and advocate for it and kind of fight for soul.
Good. Thank you so much for sharing. And because I feel the same way. It's like, especially with now the kind of mainstream psychedelics, and then we can throw in the venture capitalists and the corporations and the regulations, and and I really try to come to it from a place of non-judgment, but also concern that there's, it's like now we're just repackaging it as like the new antidepressant that might fix all your problems. But with the way psychedelics do tend to work, to me, I keep having this thought that maybe it'll just take us to soul because it kind of has to. Like if you continue to work with these medicines or continue to go, let's say, have big experiences, doesn't it just eventually bring people to that place? Or is that just me and some people I know? I mean, I don't know.
I think that's your
have a prayer.
Well, I think it's your fantasy, and I think a lot of people share in that fantasy that, it's like that meme, like if we could only give ayahuasca to Donald Trump. Yeah. Well, see, the thing about psychedelics, I think they were accurately described by someone at some point as non-specific amplifiers. And so one of the things that they could be amplifying is soul, but it could, you're whispering to me, ego. Yes, you can't wait to say it, but it could also inflate the ego, which is a big danger. But that really is not due to the nature of the substances, but it's due to our enculturation by a highly individualistic, ego-centered culture. So first we have to do some decolonizing of the mind before the psychedelics can get down to feed and awaken and enliven the soul. So we have to do something about the mind problem and the sense of individualism. I don't know, maybe it works for some people if you just drink enough that helps to dissolve that or something. But I often see the opposite, that it creates more ego-centered, highly individualistic, materialistic people. Like you said, the venture capitalists and all of them. They've had plenty of ceremonies with the kind of fashionable shaman in the Hudson Valley or, in Echo Park in Los Angeles or something. There's ayahuasca ceremonies going on everywhere, and yet the culture's getting worse. So, look at the evidence. Is it working? It's like one of my favorite renegade psychologists, James Hillman, put out a book in the 90s that was very critical of psychotherapy called We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World's Getting Worse. So yeah, I don't know if it's enough. I think there has to be a bigger kind of shift in personally, people's mindsets, but also then in the culture and like the culture around psychedelics, especially. Like in one of the articles, I think that you found interesting, I labeled it as traumadelic culture. So
such a good article.
If psychedelic means revealing the soul, I think what we actually have and what the Renaissance has been born into is a traumadelic culture, where it's all about locating your personal trauma as the cause of your adult problems. And again, that's because we're an individualistic culture. So the cause must be in you or in your family history, in your biography, in your family of origin, all of that. It's not due to the culture being sick. Look around. Who wouldn't be depressed and be anxious with everything that's going on in the world, whatever part of the world you're in. So, yeah, let's...
Yeah, I want to ask you about that a little more too, because, when I read that, I was like, wow, this is great. This is a lot of what I've been thinking and feeling over the years. Just because, there is a reality of that trauma exists, but trauma exists for every human being on planet Earth. I also, it's kind of somewhat wonderful that we're able to explore ourselves, like have the luxury of just exploring our problems constantly. And this soul journey is designed perfectly, including all your trauma. And it's like, yeah, I've had some like major trauma, but has it stopped me from living a full life that is guided by my heart and soul? No, not at all. Do I discount it? Am I spiritually bypassing it? No. But there's like, it's like you said, like we need to bring in the enjoyment, the beauty, this like connection to earth and God, and spirit and each other and community. And so many people are complaining of, unfulfillment, disconnection, isolation, loneliness. And this is long before the pandemic, and it's even worse now. And I do believe it's like there's so many people trying to figure it out, like take psychedelics, heal all my trauma. I don't even like using the word healing. I hate the word healing, to be honest. And it's become kind of this almost weird, like, I don't know what, projecting outward into the external constantly, like, oh, let me just blame my parents. Let me blame this thing that happened. Let me, but like, what if we actually just turn the opposite direction and, like went inside of our soul and got on the earth and connected and did a lot more relating? Because that's actually where I see the biggest potential for, like true healing is in relation, which is connection, community, like understanding one another versus just like pointing the finger outward or pointing the finger at one thing and just placing all the blame and saying, well, I'm just going to quit because of all my trauma. But let's hear a little bit about the premise of your article for those who didn't read it. And actually, I'm going to link it here in the show notes because it's so good.
Yeah, the premise for the recent articles, I mean, there's maybe 2 or 3 that I wrote that were all connected. But I've been writing about this for a few years now. Like I wrote a book, Yoga and Plant Medicine, back in 2019. And that started to touch on some of the issues that I was seeing in the, I don't know, for lack of a better word, the plant medicine world or the plant medicine culture. And then after I wrote that book, I did a year-long training with Gabor Mate, who's a fellow Canadian. And I'd been exposed to some of his work through people who I met while working at an ayahuasca center who had done some training with him. And I thought it would be good to train with him because one thing about Gabor is he's a really great synthesizer. He's got a voracious appetite for knowledge. He's a real kind of knowledge junkie. And he's able to take a lot of stuff that he picks up and put it together in a way that makes some coherent sense for people, which is why I think he's so popular. It's because he's able to take really complex ideas and put them across in an understandable way. He's got a real talent for that. And of course, he's got a lot of experience in addiction recovery, and he has experience with plant medicines as well. So I thought he'd be a good person to train with. So I did his training, and then I got certified in his approach, which he calls compassionate inquiry. Compassionate inquiry as an approach worked for me because it was very much related to yogic inquiry, like questions into who I really am and what's really going on. Like really trying to get down to the root of things and kind of untangle all of our perceptions and interpretations around any issue, really, how I think of myself, how I think of other people, how I interpret a particular interaction, all of those things that can cause us a lot of unnecessary suffering. And this is at the root of the yoga tradition, the quest to reduce unnecessary suffering, acknowledging that there's some suffering in life that is unavoidable, like the stuff that has happened to all of us, those unavoidable life events that are traumatizing in some way. But there's a lot of suffering that we create for ourselves. So I felt like his approach was very much in line with that. And so I got certified and I started to work as a official compassionate inquiry practitioner. And over the next couple of years, I started to get a lot of people who found me by way of Gabor. They would see Gabor Mate's videos online. I mean, he's everywhere, right? They read his books and they get curious. Okay, I think he's really nailed it here. I think he can really help me. So then they'd find their way to me as a practitioner and I'd work with them. And what I found over time is that a lot of those people that came through that route came in with this fixation on childhood trauma as the root cause of their adult problems. And so the intention for working with me was to get down to that core experience that could explain away all of their problems that they're experiencing in their life. And of course, I would try to like help people kind of broaden the inquiry, not focus so much on the childhood event and like what's trying to happen now. You know, what are your dreams? Like, what's your dream of your life? You know, what's the life that you envision? You know, kind of thinking even into the future. What kind of old person do you want to be? You know, like, what do you want to do with your life? That kind of thing. But they became so fixated on this question of, you know, what is my childhood trauma? What is the particular one that could explain this thing in my life, my difficulty with relationships or my addiction or whatever it was? They're always looking for the root cause in their childhood. I just found that incredibly limiting, and it was people were so kind of caught up in this idea. It took on the feeling to me of like a kind of a religion, or at least a cult, where on one hand they're offering you the original sin. You know, everyone has trauma, everyone is suffering from trauma, and then with the other hand they're offering you the salvation. And the way out of it is through therapy. And of course, this cult or this religion has high priests, and they're all of a particular demographic. They're all upper middle class men of European descent, of a particular age, you know, status, authority, all of that stuff that is so prevalent in our culture, you know. And so that worried me, and I really started to see it differently through my experience of working with people who came to me through that, you know, via that route. The trauma informed, you know, whenever I hear that, I'm a student of language, like I'm an etymologist. I love to get down to the root meaning of words because I think there's a lot of wisdom inherent in the language if we look deeper. So if someone tells me they're trauma informed, it tells me that they're formed, like their worldview or their sense of self is formed by trauma. So if that's how you're identifying, and if that's the lens that you're seeing everything through, it's going to take you down a particular route. And I don't think that's a route to freedom. So yeah, trauma exists. I've suffered terrible traumas in my life. You go down the list of the adverse childhood experiences, and I tick all the boxes. You know, I'm no stranger to traumatic events. But I think actually the path to freedom is more like what Carl Jung was promoting when he said, it's not so much that we solve our problems, it's that we outgrow them by adding to our capacities, our experience, like enlarging the concept or the context of the self, so that any particular event in life takes on less significance as a part of a greater whole. And so my work has always had a kind of positive spin to it, is that I'm always trying to help people increase the whole, like expand their edges of capacity and experience, so that you're better able to take the slings and arrows of life as they inevitably come, especially in the kind of culture that we live in, where it's like the culture, the buildings, the billboards, the television are abusing us on a daily basis. You know, they're all like painful to the soul. So you got to kind of grow your soul in order to take it.
Oh, I love this. And this has come up a few times on this podcast about this idea of resilience, because you know, it's funny. I went, even the words trauma informed, I laughed because now I'm like, well, anybody that is on Instagram just calls themselves trauma informed, because I guess if you follow a few trauma informed, you know, celebrities out there teaching trauma, then you can call yourself trauma informed. And it's like, well, what does this all mean anyways? You know, it's kind of a funny world, but, you know,
Well, it at least
Yeah,
tells you
yeah.
like what their orientation
Like
is.
I will center everything I
You
do and
know,
say around trauma. But yeah,
yeah. Imagine putting like on your little Instagram bio, not trauma
life
informed, but
informed. Yeah.
life informed. Like I'm formed by life. Like these traumatic events are character forming events, right? Which is maybe
Yeah.
a different way to look at them. Uh, and they can actually add to our capacity to take more risks in life, to be more compassionate with others, to be more grateful and loving of
That's yeah.
the world. Um, so it's all in how you look at things. It's
Yeah.
such a big part of it
That's
for me.
exactly been
So
my path, when like I refuse to have let my traumas get in the way of my life. And I, spent years in somatic therapy and, freaking 30 years working with psychedelics and a Buddhist path and all these, kind of soul seeking paths to really come to realize like, wow, these have all been such amazing gifts. They've actually expanded my capacity to be more resilient. And now when shit hits the fan, I'm really not affected as much as like maybe say some other people who are just so, like there's a lack, especially, and I shouldn't project and say it's the whole entire generation, but I have seen a lot of younger generations just really like break down over like very simple things in life where I'm like, well, wow, like we need to also learn that the human experience encompasses challenge and suffering and maybe like you said, like there is a way to actually be resilient to not take on so much extra suffering. It's almost like it's become a badge of honor, or it's become like something that people want. I think there's people that like almost enjoy like relishing in their trauma and relishing in all their suffering. And it's like, well, we could also just live and get on the earth and play one of those guitars and dance and like sing around a fire and maybe, do rituals. And so there are these different ways. And, I wonder what you think, how the whole like, increase in psychedelic or the desire for psychedelic therapy, or the fact that psychedelics will solve all your problems and fix your trauma and heal you. What have you observed around the psychedelic space and this kind of, this Traumadelic culture? And do you think we're just going to continue going in this kind of downward spiral, or do you see any hope for the future? Tell me something positive. You got to see some hope.
well, now I know
Well,
what you think.
I try to stay in this Buddhist path of like, okay, it just is. And who am I to say what's right or wrong? And yeah, I have concerns. I have a lot of concerns, but I'm curious.
I think you're right. You're right to have concerns. There's a lot to be concerned about, and one of the things that can happen if somebody gets on a kind of transcendentalist path, like Buddhism or DMT or whatever it is that it's a way to rise up out of the concern, out of the muck. To rise above. And what that often entails is like leaving where you come from, which is, there might be a lot of trouble happening there, and try to find a utopia, whether that's in Sacred Valley or Bali or Tulum or, go down the list. And it's a form of escapism. So you mentioned resilience earlier, and like the lack of resilience in maybe younger people or people our age, I don't know. But a general lack of resilience, lack of capacity, right? This is what I was talking about earlier, increasing your capacity, increasing your ability to deal with things as they come along and not be completely shattered by them. Of course, inevitably, there's something that's going to come along and completely rock you and completely shatter you, and that's unavoidable. Again, I see it as like having two categories, inevitable suffering and unnecessary suffering. The inevitable suffering is the stuff we just got to let God take care of. the unnecessary or avoidable suffering, that's our business to take care of, right? So we have to learn how to discern too. Like what's mine to take care of, and what's mine just to accept in a way, or as a part of life. So again, like Buddhism, psychedelics, whatever it is, it's a path. It depends on where you're trying to go, I guess. What's your orientation? Is it to escape, or is it to increase your capacity to be a force of change in this troubled world? So it all depends on the person's orientation, really, because those things are like vehicles, paths, or tools. That's all. They're not the answer itself, but they can be helpful on any particular path. Like if you want to be a millionaire entrepreneur like Aubrey Marcus, maybe psychedelics help you to do that. It certainly helped him, but also the privilege of being born into an upper middle class family and having education and opportunity and all that also really helped him manifest all of his wealth and his his wonderful life, if that's what you're looking for. So like, those are kind of the narratives or the models that we're being fed out there as to like what's possible, and psychedelics are part of that, and the meditation and the breath work and the cold plunges and the blah 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 blah, right? But there's so many other factors that contribute to our success in life, including what our idea of success is. Like we had no problem finding success in the corporate world. If you're a kind of natural magician type and you just naturally understand psychology because of your traumatic upbringing, you become extra sensitive to reading people and situations, right? So it becomes kind of a superpower in a way. So I could walk into a boardroom and completely suss it out. Like I could read the room really well and perform and deliver in a way that would excite people and sell them on an idea and all of that. No problem for a natural magician type. But like I like to say here, now I use my powers for good. At least that's the intention. So it all depends on intention, what your viewpoint is, where you're starting from. I mean, it's so complicated. Psychedelics are just something that can help, maybe, whatever your goal
Maybe,
is.
fingers crossed. No.
They're not going to save the world, though. Nothing's going to save the world. So the sooner you can disavow yourself of that fantasy, maybe then you can start taking care of your yard, your little community that you live in. Forget about saving the world. It's not happening.
And is there even anything to save? There is kind of like, because I see this a lot working in this field, that there is a lot of this desperation for the external thing that will just fix everything. And it's like, well, I mean, does anything even need fixing? This is why I actually rarely use the word healing. I don't like it. I never have. I didn't even know that was a term. I like 3 years in ayahuasca, someone said, why do you drink ayahuasca? And, this girl said for healing. And I was like, what? Like, what does that even mean? Because even though I had been on this healing path for so long, I didn't see it as like, oh, I'm trying to fix, I'm trying to heal. I saw it as like, okay, it is what it is. And I want to be a better person. I want to live a fuller life. I want to be happier. I want to enjoy life more. So I kind of wonder even this idea of like, oh, maybe psychedelics are here to fix the earth and all its problems. I have a prayer that there's some kind of a soul awakening, like you said, like maybe it's this cultural awakening of sorts. I don't know. We will. Oh,
I didn't say that. I didn't say there was a cultural awakening.
A need for, not the word awakening, but what specifically did you say?
I don't know. I think more of like cultural repair. And that's our work to do. I don't subscribe to this fantasy that there's a shift in consciousness that's happening and you can either be part of it or not, red pill, blue pill. That's an old fantasy that people have had for generations in the past, Evidence says otherwise. Let's stick to the evidence, like what we can measure and see out there. Like, really? But I think, that culture is broken. and it can be repaired. But that's like us doing the work, of restoring soul into a soulless culture, into a materialist, shallow, banal, ugly fucking culture, Costco, all the rest of it, like I don't need to go down the list. Go to any strip mall in the US.
I mean, do you have any hope for this culture? Like, is there a part of you that actually, no, seriously, like in our life?
No, I hope no, I mean, there's no hope. There's no hope for this culture. But there is hope that we can maybe build something a little better for people down the road. Like, we may not even experience the benefits of the work that we do now, but we have to think generations down the road. So, I mean, I'm always like, part of me having this working class background is I'm always like focused on the here and now, the practical, the real. So just to bring it all home, like, if there's something that is breaking my heart because I'm seeing it getting lost or destroyed out there in the culture. So if one of my big gripes is the lack of like aesthetics in our culture. There's so much ugly shit, especially in the kind of new age self-help movement. The aesthetics are terrible. There's no style, there's no class, there's no depth. So what can I do? I can either just complain about that and kind of grieve about it, or I could try to add something. I could try to keep something alive in the world that I really value. So that to me is like the on the ground everyday work. Is like, is there something that is breaking your heart out there to see it missing or see it being destroyed? Well, then fight for it, work for it, keep it alive for the generations to come, So if you go, oh, music today is terrible, it's all this AI generated, auto-tuned garbage, blah, blah. Okay, pick up a guitar, Kurt Cobain, do something about it, Or if you can't do it yourself, support somebody who's doing that. So find the people to become patrons of, just like in the old days. The artists have always been starving, but they used to have patrons. Now we have Patreon. Like, there's a line from Rumi that says, if you want to be fed, be bread. So look for the thing that you're hungry for, that you yearn for, that you desire. And that might lead you in a direction of making a contribution to the world, or finding a purpose, as we like to say,
Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you so much for that Rumi quote. And I love it. By the way, I do know one musician in Germany who's paid quite well by the German government because they actually do value their artists.
1 in a million. There you go. There's the 1 in a million.
I think it's like a whole, program for certain, but it's probably like a few hundred.
Germany.
But hearing that, I was like, oh,
Germany,
nice.
Europe in general tends to support the arts a lot more than us here in North America.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. He's like, I actually make a good living wage. I'm like, whoa, incredible what you do with those tax, whatever, 40% taxes over there. One day we'll see. But Brian, let's leave it.
Wait, you did ask me if I was an optimist or if I had hope, right? That was the question.
Yeah,
do you have hope? I would say I'm a pessimistic optimist. I think things just have to get bad enough so that, like in my life, things have to get bad enough so that enough people wake up and start fighting for what they feel is important. So I think things are just going to get worse and worse and worse until at some point everything collapses and there has to be a rebuilding, or enough people go, you know what, we're losing things that are really important. I don't want my kids to grow up in this kind of world, the way things are going. So I'm going to get out there. I'm going to get out of the fucking therapy room and get into City Hall or into the community center or wherever I can make a little difference and keep the embers of real culture alive.
I like that. Yeah, because my vision is like, well, maybe things just have to get to that ultimate collapse in order to make change. And, it's probably not, that's not like what I think most of us would prefer, but if that's what it takes for humanity to get their shit together, I don't know.
But look, that could also be used as another fantasy that only enables non-action. You know what? Like, hey,
Oh yeah, like
just
let it all,
let it burn.
a bypass, right?
Just let it burn, instead of fighting for something, right?
Or do a little of both, fight and while it's burning. I'd like to think that's what I'm doing in my life. Who knows?
It's like the analogy, clearly Western civilization, this particular North American culture is a sinking ship. The Titanic has hit the iceberg. We're going down. And the question is, what are you going to do? Are you going to be bailing water?
Staring at TikTok?
Whatever. Are you going to be locked in a little room talking about your anxiety about the ship going down? Or are you going to be out on deck bailing water? Or maybe you're playing music so that you make those last moments a little more enjoyable or something, But you have to figure out the ship's going down. Accept that. Now what are you going to do? And there's no lifeboats. Wow. There's the shocker. There's no way out.
I love that. That's a good one. That's exactly it. It's like, at least do something, right? Because complaining or fighting people or staring at TikTok all day, I'm not sure that's really doing anything for, unless that's, hey, maybe that's your way of a contribution to the world. I don't know. But I agree.
Well, it's everybody's choice, Yeah. You are doing something by complaining. Come back to James Hillman. He was a big proponent of the empty protest. Sometimes you just need to protest. You just need to go, I don't know how to fix any of this, but fuck, it pisses me off, or it's just wrong. To be able to express that without needing to follow up with an answer or a solution, because who knows?
We don't know.
But I can protest and I can go out and, do my little thing in the community, that is feeding something I want to see kept alive. That's as much as I know I can do. And that's something. And that gives my life some sense of meaning and purpose and, gets me out of the house.
Gets you out of the therapy room talking about your traumas.
Gets me out of the Maloka, gets me out of the therapy room. Yeah.
Love it. Brian, this has been a really great, I got to bring you back on, maybe come onto my summit and talk more about your soul's work. I would love to have a whole conversation with you about soul and AI, because I've been having this discussion with a lot of people later, but we don't have time.
Can I just leave you with my one-liner on that? And I find myself repeating it a lot these days because everybody's so consumed by AI. Like it's already captured people's imagination. So what I tell people is that every time you outsource your creativity to AI, you lose a bit of soul. Now, what are you going to do?
I also have been saying, so I've been agreeing. I personally feel like maybe it's just me and people I know. I feel like there's this innate knowing that something has no soul in it. And then there's an innate knowing when something does have soul. And I think with the increase of AI, I think people are going to actually become, possibly more hyper aware of like, something feels off about that writing. Oh, that feels like a human heart wrote it.
Yeah, but
maybe that's my hope.
Well, but that discernment, what's the prerequisite for that level of discernment? Is being in touch with your own soul, because your own soul is going to be the one vibrating at that frequency to say, there's a demon there, or this is like, this is another soul, or, just even, who am I texting with here? Having the sense that this is a human being or this is a bot. You have to be in touch with your own heart and soul in order to practice that discernment. So that's the first step.
Amazing. I think this could be an amazing program offer for you. That's just like, know yourself so you can actually know AI better. Because I was like, I think there's going to be a need for people to go see coaches to handle the processing around AI taking over our planet.
Well, there you go. There's a whole
niche,
whole nother branch of coaching. Perfect. Because it needs
probably already out there.
It needs to keep evolving, right, in order to stay relevant. So perfect. self-generating more jobs for people in the coaching world.
I know. Well, all the people who lose their jobs to AI can then just be AI coaches.
Well, that's right. Just like I'm no longer relevant as a graphic designer because some kid in Bangladesh or an AI bot can do your logo quicker and cheaper than I can. It may not have soul, but that's up to you to discern. That it's made me irrelevant there. Also, when I see people in my kind of extended circle going to AI therapists, people who call themselves therapists, advocating for AI therapy, that freaks me out a little bit, and that worries me.
Oh my God! I actually didn't even know there was such a thing until this moment.
It's happening.
No.
Yes.
Okay, I'm done. Now I'm checking out. I'm gonna throw this. I keep saying there's a day I'm gonna have this beautiful ceremony, and I'm gonna take my computer and throw it into a raging river. I don't know when it will be, but there will be a day.
Well,
where
I hope that dream comes true for you. But in the meantime, let's have conversations about the things that trouble us.
Exactly.
Like that's one of the things that we could do. One of the responses, like to actually talk about it. To dare risk tipping over some sacred cows, like the Traumadelic priesthood or whoever it is, right?
Or getting hate on social media.
Yeah, well, that's inevitable. That's just
I'm used to it. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I could tell you probably like to stir the pot too.
No, I actually am like, oh my God, please. I actually feel really bad for people that are just spewing. I'm like, don't you have anything else going on? How do people have so much time to just spew shit on social media? Projection should be the word of the century. It's hilarious. I find it to be funny, but no, I actually try not to stir up. But these days you say one thing and it'll stir someone up. I had someone get stirred up over a photo of myself. She didn't like the photo I used in an email. She wrote me 3 paragraphs about how my photo was like bad. And I'm like, oh my God, I wish I had that luxury.
It's triggered by a
to
photo
write
of
strangers. Yeah.
How offensive. I mean, what a thing.
I was like, wow, what a luxury you have to be writing random strangers you've never met in your life complaining about their photo that their professional photographer friend took.
Well, see, now she got triggered by your photo, and now you're triggered by her response to it. And oh my God, we all need some therapy.
We're all doomed.
You want to do some self-inquiry?
I actually was
just like, some inquiry around this?
No, here's the best part is I've learned to actually make good content over the people that write me hate like that. I'm like, ooh, this is going to make a great post.
There you go.
And then you post about it and people are like, oh my God. And then it becomes like a whole frenzy.
It's like lemons and lemonade,
Compassionate inquiry over the haters on the internet.
Beth's over there making lemonade out of the lemons he keeps squeezing in her eye.
I'm too busy just trying to do the day to day. I have beehives I need to deal with. I'm like, I don't have time to deal with random strangers I'll never meet in my life that don't like a photo of me.
Good.
That's how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, caring for bees, that's a noble job in this day and age. Yeah, the bees are one of my real totem animals. I've got one on my wrist here, and the bees almost killed me when I was 8 years old, and I think that was my shamanic initiation.
Oh my God,
but that's another story.
Yeah, we'll have to bring you back. Well, Brian, it was so good having you here. We're going to put all your links right here in the show notes. Is there anything you want to shout out that you have coming up that you want people to know about? Or
well, I'm just going to be here doing my soul work in the world. So I'm in Canada, but I work with people all over the world. That's one of the benefits of the past 3 years. It forced me to open things up to the Zoom world and all that. But it's brought a lot of gifts because I meet the most incredible people all over the world who are struggling with the same stuff that we've been talking about and asking that question, what can I do about it? So people can always work with me one-on-one. I have a lot of resources I've created over the years. There's books and yoga practice videos and all kinds of stuff. One thing I will be launching soon that I'm excited about is a part of my counseling and coaching practice that's geared specifically to men who want a real no bullshit approach to coaching and therapy. And so I've got a separate website where I'm just speaking directly to those men because I really think it's essential that more men get connected to their soul and the soul of the world. And I think it's what women want. It's what the world needs, is more soulful men. And I want that too, because I want more dudes to hang out with, who has some depth, who we can have deep conversations with, and also bullshit, not lose our senses of humor in all the kind of depth work that we do. More depth means, more sensitivity, more empathy, but it also means more humor, all of that. So anyway, that's coming out soon. And so that's going to be called soulfulman.com, and I'm rolling out like a whole thing around it. So
I'm excited for that.
good.
Send one of these soulful men my way.
You know what? I heard that from so many women in my coaching practice that led to me calling the thing Soulful Man, because I kept hearing that. If you meet soulful, where are the soulful men? If you meet one, send them my way. I heard that so many times, Beth, that I was like, I want more soulful men. Obviously, the women want more soulful men. I know the world needs it for sure. So here we go. Part of the mission.
Then you can start a matchmaking service for people like me and all that.
Let's work on it. Okay, let's put that on the burner. We're gonna work on that idea.
I actually have been telling some friends out there. I'm like, I actually have a referral fee
for hookups.
I'm like, what does it take for some introductions to the soulful men? I'm like, I know they're out there. I'm semi-nomadic. I can live anywhere.
Well,
it's possible.
You're going to improve your chances the more of them there are, right? Like, because right now in this culture, they're a bit of a rare bird. And I mean, we could have a whole nother conversation on the state of men and an archetypal approach to working with men. So definitely. I know we could talk for days. This is really nice.
Yeah, I'll bring you onto my summit to talk about that. That'd be awesome.
All right, cool. Well,
great.
Until then.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your great work in the world. I appreciate having you here.
Well, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the easy dialogue. I really enjoy that.
So good.